Just minutes ago, it finally happened. A complete turning point in Pokrovsk. Russia threw everything it had at Pokrovsk, but ended up with a total failure. Ukrainian armed forces broke through to the front. Putin will see this counterattack in his nightmares for the rest of his life. At the same time, in Kupiansk, Russian forces were driven into an encirclement right in the city center. Zelensky left Paris with the biggest jackpot of the war, one you haven't heard about yet. Very soon, the sky over Ukraine will become a graveyard for every Russian plane and missile. A powerful reinforcement. Trump pressed the "Turn off Russia" button. That's it, he just wrote it and that's all. Russia is finished forever. The countdown has begun for Putin. All this and more in our upcoming episode. Hotspot. Right now, in the USSR, they've unleashed total apocalypse for Putin on the front lines. Pokrovsk stands like a rock, and Kupiansk has become the final nail in the coffin of the Russian army. Our guys stormed in. These frontline videos are already blowing up the internet. Putin's plans have collapsed like a house of cards. Watch for all the details. The situation in Kupiansk is heating up. The Russian army is gradually losing control over the city in the Kharkiv region. Ukraine's defense forces have made a decisive statement. This is a turning point on the front.
There is a trend showing that the Russians are gradually losing control over the city, over the areas where they were present. These are the northern districts, where they entered and tried to gain a foothold. But there are fewer of them there now due to effective countermeasures. It's too early to talk about victory yet. This is a work in progress.
Meanwhile, the Russians are shouting about the so-called Potemkin capture.
Russian troops in Kupiansk have been ordered to simulate control over the city. Waving Russian flags where their small groups are present, the occupiers began putting flags into supply packages for their soldiers, which are dropped on the city using drones. At least one such operation has already taken place. However, such a short-sighted order backfired on the occupiers themselves. It became much easier for Ukrainian forces to target them. As a result, the Ukrainian armed forces were able to thwart all the enemy's plans and respond harshly. A triumph for the Ukrainian armed forces on yet another hot front line. Ukraine's defense forces crushed a Russian landing party near Novopavlivka in the Dnipropetrovsk region. 15 of Putin's soldiers were immediately sent to the afterlife. All enemy groups have been dealt with. Some are in captivity, others are eliminated. The 5th and 9th Brigades lent their support. The reinforcements arrived just in time.
Moreover, the Russians are also losing ground in Donetsk region. Ukraine's defense forces pushed the enemy back near Shakov. Ukrainian land is being methodically liberated from the enemy. What's more, Putin's own soldiers are contributing to this. A new tactic near Pokrovsk. Drone operators are striking their own troops.
Most often, the ones hit are assault troops operating with infiltration tactics. Due to the lack of identification marks and the general chaos, drone operators often mistake them for the enemy and open fire.
According to partisans, losses from such friendly fire already number in the dozens. The reasons for the chaos at the front are becoming obvious. The command is rushing the units to capture Pokrovsk and Mirnograd by the end of November. Losses are enormous, and instead of the fallen, unprepared reinforcements have arrived.
Against this backdrop, open confrontation is growing between the assault troops and UAV operators. Shootouts have been reported, and the assault troops themselves are increasingly accusing the drone operators of allegedly working for the Ukrainians.
Shock at the front. Russia has poured thousands of tons of steel onto Pokrovsk, but has barely advanced at all. Imagine the Russians are throwing all their tanks, drones, and local assault troops into Donbas. And in the end, their epic attack on peaceful Pokrovsk is stalling. Minimal progress despite colossal resources. This is already the failure of the century for the Kremlin. But that's not all. Watch for all the details.
Russia is on fire. An underground section of a main gas pipeline exploded in the Omsk region. And in addition, drones attacked the 2 main thermal power plants in the occupied part of Donetsk region. The city and several other settlements lost power. But that's still not all. The Russians are bombing their own people in the Belgorod region. In 11 days, 8 aerial bombs dropped from Russian planes landed on the heads of local residents, causing fires and destruction.
Cars burned, the fire started. They hit the minibuses. 14 to 18 people were injured.
And while the Russians in Tula are dealing with the aftermath, the occupiers are also getting hit at the front. Drone forces destroyed Russian robots in a critical sector. The Ukrainian armed forces disrupted a new supply scheme for the occupiers. And the battle continues. The advance of the occupation army in the Pokrovsk and Mirnorad area is minimal, despite the colossal resources the enemy has thrown at this direction, which is a priority for them. The occupiers are trying to encircle Ukrainian forces and close the pocket, according to analysts from the Institute for the Study of War.
Ukraine's defense forces are conducting successful operations. Counterattacks are taking place not only in Pokrovsk itself, but also along the Pokrovsk direction. First and foremost, this refers to the successful actions of Ukraine's defense forces in the Shakov area. This, in turn, creates problems for the logistics of the occupying forces and has made it possible to significantly stabilize the situation in the Rodinsk area. Rodinsk is a key logistics hub for Ukraine's defense forces.
In Kupiansk, Russian troops were unable to encircle the Ukrainian armed forces and are gradually losing positions within the city itself. Ukrainian defenders managed to cut the occupiers off from their main supply routes in the northern part of the city.
In Kupiansk itself, Russian assault groups are effectively cut off from ground logistics. The occupiers' logistics are maintained by using heavy drones. The occupiers in Kupiansk are employing the so-called infiltration tactics of small assault groups and the flag pumpkin tactic. That is, by infiltrating groups of 2 to 3 people, they try to create an illusion. By installing the Russian Aquafresh, they create the appearance of the presence of an occupying army unit in certain areas of Kupyansk.
France is developing a new generation of SAMPTI air defense systems. Ukraine will be the first country to receive these systems. The delivery dates have not yet been disclosed. As Zelensky stated, this new generation of air defense systems represents a very serious capability for intercepting Russian ballistic missiles.
This is essentially the European equivalent of the Patriot missile defense systems. At present, according to various estimates, up to 2 SAMP-T systems have already been delivered to Ukraine's defense forces. A SAMP-T system consists of 6 launchers and a radar station. Currently, according to open sources, the French army itself has up to 10 SAMP-T systems in service.
Meanwhile, Poland is preparing to send territorial defense troops to patrol key sections of critical railway infrastructure in the east of the country. After a sabotage was carried out on the line near Lublin, the Polish General Staff is now preparing for a possible attack.
Let me remind you, back in 2015, Ben Hodges stated that the Suwałki corridor is the Achilles heel of NATO countries. And let me remind you, the Suwałki corridor is a land corridor that, according to the Russian plan, it is supposed to connect the Republic of Belarus with the Kaliningrad region and accordingly pass through the territory of Poland and the Baltic states. That is why the Polish side takes the possibility of a direct confrontation with the Russian Federation very seriously.
Moreover, Ukrainian military personnel may be involved in defending the eastern borders of the EU from Russia in the event that the war ends with a peace agreement.
Russia is already inside NATO. There are acts of sabotage on Poland's railways and trains are burning. Right now, Russian hands are reaching for the arteries of the alliance. This is already a war, just without tanks for now. Poland, in a panic, is officially switching to a prepare for invasion mode. But the main question that sends chills down your spine is, can NATO stop Putin? And who will be next after Poland? Watch.
There's no need to make things up and then base your opinions on those inventions. Don't form your opinion of Russia based on that. There's no need to create an image of Russia as the enemy. You made up this idea that Russia wants to attack NATO. Are you completely out of your mind or what? You're as dumb as this table. Who came up with this? It's nonsense, you understand? Utter rubbish.
The Kremlin has begun preparations for war against Poland.
We are now closer than ever to open conflict since World War II.
In this pre-war situation, the General Staff announced a planned attack.
The aggressor has begun preparations for war. He is creating an environment meant to undermine public trust in the government, the army, and the police in order to set the stage for potential aggression against Polish territory.
The Chief of the General Staff of Poland stated that recently there has been a significant increase in acts of sabotage in the country, as well as large-scale cyber attacks. These events may indicate that Russia is creating conditions to destabilize the situation and weaken the state from within. One of the most recent such incidents was an explosion on the Warsaw-Lublin railway line.
Analyzing all the incidents that have taken place in Poland and Europe, one can say that all the traces lead east to Moscow.
Polish authorities believe that this episode and other similar cases bear the hallmarks of pre-planned operations that may be linked to the activities of foreign intelligence.
The sabotage of the railway line on the Warsaw-Lublin route. This is an unprecedented act of sabotage, directed directly against the security of the Polish state and its civilian population. We will catch the perpetrators, whoever they may be.
2 months before this, about 20 Russian drones entered Polish territory en masse for the first time. Poland's security bloc stated that the drone threat was more serious than the authorities had believed.
The claim that these were cardboard and paper objects is not entirely true.
The Polish leadership does not hide the fact that it is preparing for a direct confrontation. We
can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
Military analyst and former SBU officer Ivan Stupak is convinced that the Kremlin is already waging a hybrid war against Europe. And the only question is when it will escalate into an open conflict.
For Russia, what it is currently doing in Europe is already a war. Asymmetric, non-linear, hybrid. Call it whatever you want, but it is ongoing.
Poland's strategic position between the Kaliningrad region and Belarus makes it one of the key countries for the security of all NATO. And Warsaw itself plays an important role in ensuring the defense of the eastern flank. Consequently, the defense of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will directly depend on the ability of Polish forces to respond to potential threats in a timely manner.
Everything depends on our stance. Will we be able to deter the enemy, or will we encourage them to act aggressively?
While most European countries spent many years discussing the potential threat from Russia, Poland was engaged in systematic and targeted preparations. Over the past decades, Warsaw has significantly strengthened its military capabilities, and the buildup of its defense potential began immediately after Russia's annexation of Crimea.
While other countries waited to see who would make the first move, Poland took action. In
2024, Poland's defense budget rose to 4.7% of its GDP. This is the highest figure among all NATO member states. Modernization of military equipment and an increase in troop numbers to more than 200,000 soldiers. This makes the Polish army one of the largest in Europe. In addition, Poland has become one of the largest purchasers of weapons from the United States. The country has invested about $50 billion.
Without the United States, there is no alliance. We need to spend more on defense not to replace the Americans in Europe, but to keep them here.
The Polish people are tired of the war taking place in the neighboring country. As a result, there has been a deterioration in attitudes toward Ukrainians among them. The Polish Minister of Defense stated that people are not seeing the main enemy, and those who speak out against Ukraine are acting against Poland.
This should be valued and respected, not used to incite hostility toward Ukrainians in Poland or to fuel anti-German sentiment.
The Chief of the General Staff of Poland called for the creation of a Cold War 2.0 large-scale investment in defense, and making it clear to Moscow that any attack on NATO would receive a decisive response. Now, the future of European countries depends on NATO's readiness to defend itself.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. A bombshell from Macron. Ukraine is getting 100 Rafales and 8 air defense systems. Zelensky returned from Paris with the biggest gift yet. The skies over Ukraine will be patrolled by armadas of fighter jets, and every Russian missile will be shot down before it even gets close. This isn't just aid, it's a complete game changer in the air. What will Ukrainian aviation look like in the near future? Watch to find out everything important you need to know.
France is strengthening Ukraine's defense, particularly in the areas of air defense and aviation. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that our country will be able to receive 100 Rafale F-4 aircraft, powerful French radars, 8 SAM-TT air defense systems, as well as 6 launchers. In addition, Ukraine is receiving 55 electric locomotives, which will provide extra support for the country's infrastructure.
What was signed with the president is more of a permit for delivery. But with the Dassault company, that will be an actual contract for the delivery of aircraft. So we have a political decision. But a separate contract will need to spell out all the financial terms under which we will receive these aircraft.
It was stated that President Zelensky did not disclose the full list of aid for security reasons. However, even the published list could create significant problems for the Russians.
It rather belongs to the heavy 4th plus generation fighter jets. Well, if we consider the modern version of the Rafale, in terms of takeoff weight, number of hardpoints, and combat load, it basically matches the Russian Su-35 and Su-37 fighters, meaning the most modern Russian fighter jets. The Rafale and Gripen are being equipped with Meteor missiles. This missile doesn't use a solid fuel engine, but a ramjet, which gives it a much greater range. Initially, its range was announced as 200 kilometers, but now in promotional materials, the figure of 300 kilometers has been repeatedly stated. So this is a missile that it is not inferior in its characteristics to the Russian R-37M missile, but it will be a permanent weapon.
Since the summer of 2024, American F-16S have been carrying out combat missions in Ukraine. To further strengthen our air defenses, our country intends to purchase Gripen fighters from France. These aircraft can compete with the F-16S and more.
The F-16 and Mirage 2000 fighter jets that we have received are currently being used for approximately 70% of the time for air defense missions, and the Mirage is actually being used 100% of the time, mainly for air defense tasks.
Earlier, Zelensky and Macron signed a declaration of intent to cooperate in the acquisition of defense equipment for Ukraine.
Unfortunately, our financial capabilities as a country that is very peaceful and has been at war for 3.5 years do not allow us to purchase aircraft. For now, we are only being given aircraft.
On the eve of his visit to France, Volodymyr Zelensky announced a historic agreement and a significant strengthening of Ukrainian aviation. In addition to France, Spain is also preparing an aid package for our country. At the moment, Ukraine's priority is to strengthen its air defense.
It happened. Trump is shutting off the tap. Russia is left without a penny for its oil. The plan is brilliant and ruthless. Putin's financial oxygen has been completely cut off. No loopholes, no gray schemes. These are not just sanctions. This is the end of the Russian war machine in just a few months. How long will Russia last? Watch.
America is preparing to deliver the most painful blow to the Kremlin. Donald Trump makes it perfectly clear. The era of flexible sanctions is over. If Russia does not stop the war, the world must cut off its oxygen.
Any country that does business with Russia will face very serious sanctions.
The President of the United States is ready to sign a new package of sanctions against the Russian Federation. According to Reuters, the White House has already signaled Congress. The 47th President will approve the bill, but only on his own terms. If it includes a provision that secures for him the personal, exclusive right to make final decisions. Whether to impose sanctions or not, this is exactly what becomes the main bargaining chip.
For the White House and the President, it has always been important that the sanctions package includes a provision guaranteeing the President the right to make the final decision on sanctions. Therefore, if this is included, I think the President will consider signing the bill, a White House source said.
The bill was authored by Republican Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal. The document provides for 500% tariffs on imports from countries that purchase Russian oil, gas, and uranium. The goal is not just to hit the Kremlin, but also to cut off all oxygen to Moscow's partners who continue to support the financing of the war.
At this point, Trump's determination to once again put additional pressure on the Russian Federation, particularly on its oil market, is quite strong.
Trump's new sanctions could deal a devastating blow to the Kremlin's economy. The Russian oil market risks losing its key buyers. India, China, and Middle Eastern countries are under threat. Trump, however, proposes to expand the list of targets and add Iran to the sanctions list, a country that helps Moscow circumvent restrictions and strengthen oil schemes.
When we clearly understand that 60% of Russian oil is bought by China and the Americans are unlikely to escalate against them, any forms of sanctions, especially after the meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump, they essentially took a 1-year timeout on imposing mutual sanctions. So most likely part of the Russian oil market in China will remain.
At the same time, countries that were the second and third largest buyers of oil, namely India and Turkey, are now currently and proactively seeking alternative sources of supply.
And while preparations are underway across the ocean to deliver a decisive blow, RIFI is dealing with the consequences of yet another sanctions package. At the end of October, the US introduced a new package of sanctions against the Russian oil sector. Rosneft, Lukoil, and 31 of their subsidiaries have come under the restrictions.
They have already seriously shaken the Russian market. The price of Urals oil has plummeted. Truly, it dropped sharply. And at the same time, yes, as of today, there is a very serious problem with foreign assets, particularly those of Lukoil. At the same time, we've already heard that the American company Chevron has received preliminary approval from the US Treasury Department to enter into negotiations with Lukoil about purchasing their foreign assets. The estimated value of this package is around $20 billion. In any case, such developments are underway and we are watching closely. We need to understand that the assets we're talking about are the very instruments through which the Russian Federation sells its oil. If these instruments end up in other hands, Russia will have significantly fewer opportunities to maintain its current volume of oil sales that it has at the present moment.
If Trump does end up signing the bill and countries reduce their purchases under US pressure, the blow to Russia's budget revenues will be catastrophic. Even Russian propaganda will no longer be able to hide the real economic consequences. And the Kremlin will feel pressure it has never faced throughout the entire full-scale war.
Until we see the final version of the bill, until it is at least approved by the majority of the American parliament, in this situation, it's nothing more than, let's say, threats.
Urgently, a deadly gray zone has appeared on the front line. The trenches are empty, the land is scorched. Between our forces and the Russians, there are 20 kilometers of hell, where only drones rule. Neither infantry nor tanks dare to go in. A lightning-fast death from the sky. Military analysts are in shock. The rules of war have been rewritten forever. Watch for all the shocking details. A UAV operator from the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade perfectly drops a grenade into a trench with Russian soldiers. One of them tries to throw the explosive out, but doesn't make it in time. As a result of the successful drop, several occupiers were eliminated. This is exactly what modern warfare looks like now. In fact, there are practically no assaults or frontal attacks with vehicles. Drones have put an end to positional warfare. That was the headline of an article published in the American outlet Politico. The fighting in Ukraine no longer resembles the trench warfare of World War I. Instead, drones have erased the continuous front line, creating a zone of destruction. As a result, a gray zone of chaos has formed, stretching about 20 kilometers from the front line where drones hunt soldiers. The wounded are left to die since evacuating them is extremely difficult and delivering ammunition, food, and water to the fighting troops is nearly impossible. The sky above the gray zone is shrouded in smoke from drones. UAVs are equipped with thermal imagers, cameras, bombs, and cannons. And some lie for hours along the roads, waiting for military vehicles to pass by. At the same time, there is a hunt for UAV pilots who are sitting tens of kilometers away. We have moved on to a war of drones against drones. Now drones can set up ambushes, intercept enemy logistics systems, and disrupt supply lines. In addition, it has become more difficult to hold positions. If you are detected, all the weaponry in the area will immediately be directed at your destruction. Pavel Polisa, colonel of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Russian military public pages are quoting this article, but as always in their own way. Here's one example of Russian propaganda, where it says that Russian drones don't give the Ukrainian armed forces a moment's rest. Although in reality, it's exactly the opposite. Because of Russian drones, Ukrainian soldiers are forced to stay at their positions for weeks. Drones make evacuation, rotation, and the delivery of ammunition and food deadly dangerous. Information from open sources shows that it is actually the Russian army that abandons its wounded soldiers instead of evacuating them. Now, Russia is also trying to keep up in the production of various strike UAVs. For example, in frontline areas, the enemy has started using new types of Iranian Shahed 101 drones. The warhead weighs 8 to 9 kilograms, and its flight range is several hundred kilometers. So far, the occupiers have not managed to localize the production of this drone in Russia. The UAVs were produced in 2024 in Iran, but it's only a matter of time. The Russians learn quickly from their mistakes.
We're going head-to-head with them, and they have some really impressive developments. They have their scientific base is established and it works. They managed to suppress and break down, any internal resistance, any attempts to oppose the war. That's why they have these developments and the system is functioning. They prepared for war, they improved the Shaheds, and they made Lancets based on Israeli drones.
Drones have become so effective that they've even pushed artillery back from the front line and have made it nearly impossible to use armored vehicles to supply the troops. Drones have become useful for delivering and evacuating combat reconnaissance and for remote mining. tasks that were previously usually carried out by people during war. Despite the difference in resources, Ukraine currently has parity with Russia in drones on the front line, and in some areas even holds an advantage. But the development of this military component never stops, not even for a minute. That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.